Well, welcome to Law Talk, my friends, brought to you by the Falvello Law Firm. Remember, FalvelloLaw.com, a lot of great information. Phone number, very easy, 570-788-4191. We were talking last time about 100 years. They're celebrating 100 years. On the show today, no stranger to the show, is attorney Conrad Falvello and Alexis Falvello. She is now the owner of Falvello Law Firm. Connie, interesting story about the 100 years. I'm writing down here, your father incorporated us in 1984 for Samson Productions. But going back in 1963, when two young guys named John Morato and Sam Lassant, right, we had to incorporate. Well, he was the president. I mean, he had to incorporate his own name because we actually worked for him.
I remember that story,
yeah,
Sam, because you were too young.
Yeah.
You and Johnny were you were too young. And so he had to be the president.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but when you look at back years and you look at 100 years, okay, I look back at 63 and then it's 84, 39. Alexis, how does that make you feel? I mean, when you're from family of law, I mean, like, what do you feel about that?
Well, I feel proud, really, to be a part of the family, and particularly the legacy, the legal legacy that we have, and. But, as an attorney, you're in a unique position where you're able to help people. Unfortunately, sometimes when they come to you seeking help, it's not under the best of circumstances. But, it's a long history of Falvellos helping people in the Hazleton area. So for that, I'm proud.
And going back to, just a review, your dad, when they came here, okay, your dad and your uncle, Rocco, they were in an orphanage, right? Or a foster home?
Well, yeah, they started out in St. Patrick's Orphanage in Scranton.
Okay.
As very young children. And then as they got older, they went to United Charities. And that's where they stayed through high school, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And then your dad went on to college?
Well, that was my grandfather.
Your
my grandfather and his brother, Rocco, and their other brother, Jim, came out of United Charities, and they went to college, and then Conrad and Rocco went to law school, and James went to dental school.
Mm-hmm. Now, then your dad comes into the picture, okay? So how many children did your grandfather have?
Just my father.
Your father,
one.
Okay. When your dad went into law school, all right, and where did he meet your mom?
He and my mother met when they were in college. My mother is an interesting story herself. She and her sister grew up in the Methodist home, an orphanage, in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. And their two brothers grew up at the Hershey School in Hershey. And that was because when they were very young, her father, his name was James Mancuso, he died from black lung at the age of 32, leaving my grandmother, his wife, Dolores, with 4 children. And of course, it was very much like my grandparents, my grandfather, because they just had no money. So the kids were taken in. My mother's case and her sister in an orphanage, and my 2 uncles at the Hershey School.
It's interesting because then your mom and dad had how many children? You have
5.
5 children, okay. And all of you, thank God, are very successful, right? When you, your mom, I remember we had great times with your mom. Smart person. Your mom is a very intelligent person. I always enjoyed her conversations. My wife and I really, and I'm not just saying this, when we would have conversations with your mom, she was just so full of knowledge and common sense, which, we don't have that degree anymore, common sense.
Well, no. Well, you had to have common sense, the way the way they were raised. You had to figure things out for yourself.
Yeah.
You know, it was a time when you had to do that. You know, you didn't have the world's information at your fingertips.
Yeah.
On a phone, so you had to think things through, and you had to figure things out, and that's what she taught us. You know, myself and my brothers and sisters as we were growing up. She big proponent of education.
Yeah.
She quit college when she married my dad. They married at age 19. I was born when they were 20. And then after the 5 of us were in school, my mother went back to college. She went back to Bloomsburg and commuted to Bloomsburg from Hazleton almost every day and got her degree in special education. And then taught in the Hazleton Area School District for, I think, 27 years before she retired. And she, like I said, was always a big proponent of education. Every one of my siblings, all 5 of us, have doctorate level degrees, which is somewhat unusual, I think. Yeah. So, and that was, you know, because of her and my dad.
Getting into law and living in a home where your dad was practicing law, and you're there, you see your dad coming home, and you see the different things that he's involved with law, and then you went into law school. The same thing with you, Lexi. You know, looking at your parents, looking at your dad, looking at your grandfather in law. You know, in our home, we always talked about communications. You know, with Jack Palance and the partnership we had and the whole bit. So you live in that. You know, I never told my kids go into communication. They decided to go on their own. You know, they could have done whatever they wanted to do. So with that, you know, you're living with that, okay? And you develop certain things in your life. How to be respectful, how to treat people the way you should be treated. Like you said, it's a passion you're doing. When you were working with your dad, we left off last time on this terrible plane accident that went into a mountain, okay?
Right.
And
Yeah.
we picked on, what happened? Your dad was the key lawyer then, or the key counsel, or whatever.
Yeah, last time I explained, he was lead counsel on the liability part of the case that was tried in New York City. The defendants there admitted or conceded liability, and then the case went to Puerto Rico for what we call the damage trial, and that's when I became involved. I was still in law school, heading into my last year, and I got to work on that case almost exclusively for the summer between my second and third year in law school, and that's what got me started in really in the litigation end of the practice of law, and that's what I've done for most of my 49 years now in practicing. And then when Alexis came to the firm out of the district attorney's office, she's picked that up, and now I do a little bit of litigation now, but most of that is done by Alexis, and you know, I'll handle estates and some corporate clients now.
When you say you worked on it, for the sake of us lay people, okay, what, I mean, like you say, what did you have to do? Get testimonies, you know, what do you?
Well, it was very very comprehensive. I did a little bit of everything. For example, my dad got sick right before the trial. There was a brief due in federal court on what we call conflict of laws. What law do you apply to the damages of the case?
Yeah.
Is it the law of Pennsylvania, where the 4 people were from, or the law of Puerto Rico, where the crash occurred? And so that was a pretty significant issue in the case. So he got ill. There was a deadline on the brief. I had to do it. So we did that, and then once we got to Puerto Rico, I was involved in witness preparation, and I believe I mentioned this before. We had completed, I believe it was 22 video depositions of some of the fact witnesses that from Pennsylvania that could not make it to Puerto Rico, and that was the first time, at least in federal court in Puerto Rico, that had ever been done. So I had to line up all the logistics, meaning we had to get the equipment for the courtroom, for the playback. That had to meet all the standards of the federal rules for playback. So it was a little bit of everything, from brief writing to witness prep of those witnesses that came down to Puerto Rico in person. Two of them were expert witnesses. One was an economic expert, and then also lining up the logistics and scheduling for the witnesses that had to be presented by videotape.
So by doing this, you gain a lot of experience in different.
No doubt. I mean, it's really the only way to learn it. It's like any business. The only way you really learn it is by doing it.
Yeah.
And so I got a crash course in 3 weeks in Puerto Rico.
And that leads me to you, Lexi. Okay, do you remember the very first case you had? That was trying. I mean, you've done a lot of them. I mean, but and then how you prepare for that and because when you look at experience, and you look at we all have to start somewhere. Right. So most lawyers start with firms, and I guess they learn in different projects. When you came on board, you were no stranger, of course, to law. What was your first, without naming names? I mean, do you remember your very first case, which was a trying case for you?
I think every case can potentially present unique circumstances that are trying, But when I started working part-time with my dad, I already had years of experience under my belt in the DA's office. And that really, like he was saying, I was immersed in court every single day. I was trying 5 or 6 cases a year, and cases that are tried, of course, are cases where the prosecution perhaps has vulnerable spots for the defense to try and create that reasonable doubt, which is a standard in a criminal case. Having said that, I think that truly laid the foundation for me to transition then into the civil practice and the world in civil litigation, but also, in listening to my father speak about the preparation that's necessary going into this horrific case, in Puerto Rico, really that's how we approach every case. The possibility of trial exists, and the preparation is necessary to make sure that you have a case that is presentable to a potential jury. I've learned that from my time in the DA's office, certainly, but also by being involved in the practice under my dad's wing. And that's beneficial because you give less room in those cases through preparation. You give less room for the defense to try and wiggle out of either liability or the damages in a case. One case that comes to mind, I represented 5 individuals, a woman, her boyfriend, and 3 children, and the police crash report indicated that there was only 1 crash involved. Well, when the client and her boyfriend came to me, there were 2 crashes, they had said. There was an initial impact, their vehicle spun out, was perpendicular in the road, and then was T-boned by another vehicle. Well, the woman in the other vehicle denied any involvement and said, I took evasive measures and then struck a tree. Well, we had our experts on board immediately. We had a private investigator who found transfer paint from my client's vehicle to the vehicle that was denying any physical contact with the vehicles. And then we hired an accident reconstructionist who verified through electronic evidence that this woman in fact had 2 impacts, one with my client's vehicle and then a second impact with the tree. Now she only mentioned to the police the second impact with the tree. There were significant damages in that case, and the injuries to the children were pretty severe. Thankfully they recovered, but we were able to pursue the compensation that they were entitled to from all parties involved, particularly this woman who was initially denying having any involvement in a second crash, which we thankfully were able to prove occurred, and they paid up policy limits on that case. So,
And that's important because without that investigation, you wouldn't have had the second responsible party at the table. They wouldn't have been there. And that came just from the hard work, the detailed work, and the use of good investigators and good experts.
Stay on that point, because remember I said to you I have something to say, okay? And what I'm going to tell you is a true story, okay? Folks, it's an interesting story. You talk about advertising, you talk about television, you talk about different things. True story coming up after the break. Welcome back to Law Talk, my friends. I'm your host, Sam Lassant. Law Talk's brought to you by the Falvello Law Firm. FalvelloLaw.com, 570-788-4191. And once again, I want to thank you for making one of these shows, #1 shows in northeastern Pennsylvania. Based on a scientific poll by the Susquehanna Polling Research, they were voted #1 in the country as a polling company, and we appreciated those people who participated. Law Talks up to 50,000 people a week in northeastern Pennsylvania. My show is well over 60-some thousand. We appreciate that very much. My guest, of course, Attorney Conrad Falvello and Attorney Alexis Falvello. Interesting story, Alexis, when we talk about your slogan, your case is our fight. Going down to see my good friend Jake Ripa at Ripa Jewelers, and there's a lady walking with her husband. She said, "Mr. Lassant, could I see a minute?" "Sure." And she said, I want to tell you a story about, Falvello. I watched the show, and she said, we've been watching, and you've been on for years. It kept you a little sabbatical, but you've been on, but your commercials run, etc. And she said, we had a very difficult thing happen to our family, and it was going to be a very difficult. We knew we had a fight on our hands. I'm watching the commercial, Alexis Falvello saying, your case is our fight. So she told my husband, she said, I told my husband, let's give him a call. Allison answered the phone. It was Allison, right? Yep. She said she was absolutely fabulous, okay? And the point was, they knew they had a fight on their hands. But the fact is, so when she came to you, I said, could I mention you? She says, absolutely not, okay? But I said, could I tell the story? She said, yes. I said, because I'd like people to know that. The thing was, that brought in mind, and I've asked Connie this a number of times, how do you know if it's a case or if it's frivolous? Because you know what they say, the lawyers, they want to sue, they want to sue, okay? What goes through your mind as to, when you decide that's a case?
In order to determine whether or not a case has merit, I think the first thing I do is speak with a client, right? The case I just mentioned about the woman who said, no, there were 2 crashes, and the police report said there was only 1. You have to listen to the client. But you looked at other findings, other evidence in a case to determine whether or not the case has merit. You do start with the police report, and oftentimes they're right. Sometimes they don't get it right, but most of the time they do. But you also look at other evidence such as injuries that the individual sustained. A lot of time the manner in which the crash occurs can give some insight to the injuries that the individual has. So for example, that case I just mentioned, there was a 1-year-old who was seated in the rear of the vehicle, and she was seated in a rear-facing car seat, and where the impact occurred was where she had a broken femur, right? So the consistency there, of course, is very compelling as far as evidence and determining merit of a case. So you have to look at it from many angles to make that determination.
Knowing you have experts on hand in different areas, correct? Because it's not, there's a lot involved. You know who to bring in for different analysis, etc. How do you determine that, Alexis?
Well, it just depends on the need, right? So in that particular case, the need was for an accident reconstructionist to come in after we had hired the private investigator. Sometimes you have injuries you need to relate to the crash itself, a causation issue. Did the crash cause the injuries? Pennsylvania law says also any aggravation of an existing injury is something that's recoverable as far as damages go. So
what does that mean?
So if I have a bad back, and I'm treating with a chiropractor prior to a crash, and I get hit from behind, and my bad back then requires me to seek injections, potentially surgery, something that's a bit more aggressive on the treatment end. Of course, we're going to want to have an expert on board who's going to say, yes, she had these pre-existing lower back issues, but they were at this level when the crash occurred, whoop, spiked up here, and the need for treatment increased, and that spike in care that was required is really also how you try to substantiate damages and value to a case. And you pull in an expert to do that. So in that case, it would be a physician. Now, there's my first 7-figure settlement that I received on behalf of a client involved a woman who was working as a nurse, and she was pretty badly injured. She had lower back issues, but she also suffered from significant depression following the crash.
Oh my gosh.
And that, unfortunately...
That's terrible.
Right, and it caused her, she was in her, I think, late 50s, maybe her early 60s, and that caused her not be able to work. So of course we pulled in an expert to make that determination, but also we pulled in an expert to say, okay, here's vocationally what her damages are. So because of her lack of employment, because of the injuries, because of the crash, she's not able to work, right? So the vocationalist will say, these are the damages as far as her lost income. But then we take that and we get it to an economist who's going to speak to damages that are all inclusive of future medical treatment, wage loss, and that is a comprehensive look at what the damages are.
Do you find, Alexis, when you're putting together a case like this, and you're doing all this work, and you're ready to go in the court, okay? Now the other side, they're not stupid. Mm-hmm. They're going to say, look, they want to settle for 6 figures or 7 figures. We know if we go into court, the jury may come out and make it way higher than that. They have a sense, because they know what you've done preparing the case. Has that happened?
As far as, well, there are,
Where they settle before you go into court because they know that they have a case on there.
Oh, certainly. And that's why you work up a case with the experts, based on the need of what the expert would be. You work up the case because the insurance companies are not looking out necessarily for the best interest of the person who's injured.
Which is sad.
So it's unfortunate and it's frustrating at times. And, as a practicing attorney, there are days that I have where it's tough because you see the client and you become friends with them.
And that's what this lady said. You were like family.
So yes, and you're advocating for them, and you see their struggles on a daily basis, and it's our job then to make those damages known to the insurance
and
company.
I think there's where you having the experience that you have, certainly learning from your dad and your grandfather, etc. I think that those are key in any attorney, okay? And we have a lot of great attorneys in northeastern Pennsylvania, okay? Mm-hmm. They all try to do their best, but you have to separate those kinds, like you said, that are just so crazy. Looking at your daughter, you must be very proud, Conrad, huh? To have someone who's smarter than you.
No, listen, that's...
I had to throw that in you,
I can take credit for that accomplishment, that she's smarter than I am, but, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
That's the way it should be, in my opinion. But, and I think Alexis makes a good point there, Sam, is we do have some very good trial lawyers here in northeastern Pennsylvania. Yeah. We really do. I know a lot of them. I've worked with a lot of them. We have good plaintiff lawyers. We have good defense lawyers, and particularly the defense guys. They know who can work a case up and how they work it up, and that's very important. But I think in part what sets us apart, we had it today before we came here. Our clients feel comfortable enough to just walk in our office anytime. Mm-hmm. You can't do that with a Philadelphia lawyer.
How come my door's locked when I get there?
Well, you come too early. No,
it's me, Sammy.
No, we used to. Yeah, we're both early birds, Sam. Yeah. But no, you can't do that with somebody from out of town.
Exactly.
You can't do that. You can just walk in. Our staff will take care of them if they need an appointment or need a document, or they just need to see us. If we're there, we'll see them.
And I think that's the whole key. 100 years, I think that's a major accomplishment. You have a lot to be proud of. And I'm sure there'll be many years of success on your part, Alexis.
Thank you.
It's called Falvello Law Firm, my friends. It's 570 788-4191. Go to their website and you'll learn a lot more. If you have any questions, I have a number of questions, but I wanted to talk about the 100 years and all the great things that happened with Falvello Law Firm. But for those people who've called in your questions, I will get them to Connie and Alexis within the next month or two. We'll see you next time.